Great to see you, Dr. Stanford. Dr. Chapman, great to see you. Glad you're here.
That's much better, Angela.
Thank you.
So what we talked about,
Yes, it's a nice picture, but
what we talked about in the planning is if we have low attendance, then no one needs another Zoom meeting at this point in our lives. But so we're very blessed to have this group, and we might not need to break into discussion groups. We could actually stay together and have the conversation together, and then that might eliminate some reporting out time too. But let's see how many people end up coming, and we could break into two groups depending on the attendance. Thanks for being here. Here we go. We've got more people coming in. Great to see everybody. I think we can get started, and then hopefully others will join in.
All right, we're everybody ready? Okay. Where's that? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Manny Clark, and I am the volunteer co-chair for Region 6 of Columbus City Schools. My role is to help facilitate the conversation tonight and take you through the agenda of the evening. Excuse me. Please keep your cameras on for the entirety of the meeting. Keep your microphones on mute until we get to the discussion breakout rooms, and use the chat function should you have a question, and we will have the other regional volunteers assist in making sure you are heard. We'll acknowledge when we don't have an answer that you may be asking in the chat rooms. So I'd like to ask everyone also to help us exercise a little bit of grace. Everyone will have an opportunity to voice their opinion. Help us remain positive. We know that this year has been stressful, and sometimes the conversations about facilities and plannings of the future can be stressful. But we're here and we're going to remain positive and constructive. We will acknowledge when we don't have answers right now. All questions in the chat will be documented by our student lead, Carl Moore Jr., and answered by district staff at a later time and compiled in an FAQ document. We also have Chief of Transformation and Leadership, Dr. Angela Chapman, filling in for Area Superintendent Dr. Luther Johnson and Board Member Eric Brown. They'll be joining us this evening. Additionally, we have Colin Lewis from Patel for Kids and representation from Legat Architects, who is the planning consultant to assist in the process. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Angela Chapman.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening and sharing your feedback. We certainly appreciate your sacrifice and your gift of time for giving us this time this evening and for sharing your feedback with us on this very, very, very important conversation. So I look forward to the evening tonight.
Good evening. I'm Eric Brown, one of your school board members, and I'm very happy to be here with you this evening. The school board, the other members on the board, and I appreciate the time, thought, and values that you have contributed to this FMP process, to our community, and to our future. Your work is immensely important. We now are well into this process, and your efforts, ideas, and contributions have been great. Really appreciate it. Please keep in mind, number one, that we value you and you're important. There are no bad ideas. We want you to engage. We want you to talk. We want you to share your thoughts and be creative. If nothing else, whatever idea you contribute is worthy of consideration. We may think about it and say, that doesn't make sense, or here's why we can't do this. But in that process, we learn. And just the consideration and discussion of whatever thought you have has value and allows us to learn. So as I said, please speak up, engage, and share your thoughts, creative or otherwise. Thank you all for your time, and look forward to more great discussion this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Brown and Dr. Chapman, for your introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Pavin. I'm a project manager with Legat Architects. We have Robin Randall and Melva Williams-Argao as part of our team joining us tonight. For those of you who we've seen before, welcome back. We appreciate your time. And those of you who we haven't seen yet, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate you being here. As we move forward through some of our conceptual development in the fall, you will be also seeing our partners from Ferris Planning and Design and AEC. Just as a reminder, all voices are encouraged to be heard. And so we direct your attention to the website. This is a live QR code. So if you're interested, you can hold your device up to this, and you'll be directed to future surveys, previous meeting notes and summaries, all the FAQ sheets, and an email address that, should you have any questions or concerns, is all being documented as we move forward through our process. Just to recap, what is the facility master plan? What are our goals? What are the intentions of what we are doing here? First and foremost, it is reflect the vision of a portrait of a graduate. There has been a lot of time and resources that have gone into creating this portrait, and we are considered basically the second phase of how our facilities can help our students achieve the vision set forth in the 6 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. We're supporting academic programs at all grade levels. This is a district-wide facility recap and understanding of where we want to go from top to bottom in this district. Aligning the utilization enrollment for all regions. We're taking a regional look at the most effective and efficient way to implement the plan that will support a portrait of a graduate. Along the way, we're to gain consensus, meaning that as we progress through the different phases of the plan, we will be reaching out and gaining consensus to what we want this plan to be. It will be an approved plan from everybody that's involved along the entire process. The implementation of the projects, because this is the largest district in the state of Ohio, this will be a very extensive plan. A lot of the plans could be 10 to 12 years to implement. And because of that, we need to work together to phase this thing appropriately, efficiently, and cost effectively. And then last thing of note is that the design of school buildings and furniture selection comes after approval of the plan. What the final result of the plan is a report. So we will have a master document that will be basically the glue of how all of these meetings, results, and data that is input into this plan and how it results back to the portrait. As an example, to show you what some of the results of what a master plan will be, this is something that Robin and I participated in about 4 years ago for Shaker Heights City Schools. Granted, the scale is much different, but the idea behind addressing from a high-level district standpoint of what the concepts of each of where we want these schools to be. For this particular concept, there was renovating the elementary schools, building a new middle, and renovating the high school, but keeping all of the current grade banding that they had established throughout all of their existing schools. And then you notice in the top right, the green, yellow, red, that was the consensus building that I mentioned earlier, that we have a process of voting on each of the concepts presented as we move through the process. Green, in this case, green was a plan that was well received. Yellow was hesitant. There's other plans, other concepts that were liked more, and then red was a plan that was not received well. Where are we in our process? We started with the gather phase in April. In the envision phase, we introduced the portrait of a graduate, and then the define phase where we are now is where we like to call the programmatic phase. We're starting to develop what the spaces that we want to see within our facilities. Moving forward, we will have a report out of all the data gathered in the problem defining phase. So basically the first 3 phases. And then starting in October, we will be getting together to go over the concepts and implementing all of the data or using the data to help implement the concepts that we'll be creating for review. Just as a quick recap, step 1 for the gather phase, we really wanted to get an understanding of what was working, what not working within your schools. So we asked the question of what aspects of your schools do you feel were successful? We received a wealth of information back to this. The bullet points that you're seeing here, the pathways, the communication, the pride in culture and ethnic diversity, dedication and commitment, the resiliency. This is a summary that was covered through all 6 regional discussions. However, each individual regional discussion is summarized on the FMP website. So if you would like to see the complete collation of all of the discussion points, please go to the website. And then in contrast to that, we wanted to know what wasn't working. So we knew where to start from as we were moving forward through the process. And so the lack of sensory and intervention spaces, the status of the schools and across regions, whether it's grade banding or upgrades, they weren't consistent and equitable for region. So this is where we started from to then start to, in step 2, envision how we can address these items. And the way we wanted to address how we were going to envision these items were approaching the first 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. Because of the limited constraints of time within our discussions, we've broke down into addressing 3 pillars at a time. That way we can actually have some really in-depth conversation of what these pillars mean and how they can lead to the success of our students. We started with adaptability. We had several questions about adaptability and agility with the design. We had a couple of summary points. This happens to be the Region 6 summary. And again, all of the other regions can be seen from the F&P website. Our second question was about communication, the ways that we can improve communication, or what equipment or materials or spaces or settings are needed to epitomize the utmost communication and strive to have the best communication and create the students that can communicate to each other the best. And then we discussed global empathy, and a lot of what we discussed here and some of the feedback we've got were about creating community centers, using our schools to be beacons of the community, and how each of these schools can reflect environmental stewardship, making the right decisions for responding to global sustainability. Step 3, we are now reviewing the final 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. And with that, I will hand it over to Robin.
Thank you, Dennis. Welcome to phase 3 of the master plan. Thank you so much for taking your evening. We really are excited about discussing these 3 topics of creativity, critical thinking, and technology. We're very lucky to be joined by Colin Lewis from Bartel for Kids. He's going to take us through the descriptions of each of these pillars, and then he's also going to talk about the science of learning behind the pillars and how that can be translated into facilities. Take it away, Colin.
Okay, the first pillar we're going to discuss this evening is around creativity, and how that is being defined in our portrait is our students will be imaginative and explore original ideas and innovative solutions by transcending traditional thoughts, patterns, and relationships. And one way we can get at that through the space is understanding there's a relationship between the openness of the physical space and the openness of our minds for creativity and new ideas. The views, the vistas, the ceiling height, and wall color can affect expansive thinking.
So if you think about a traditional school, usually creativity is relegated to the art room or the music room. And so we're looking at an art room, and usually the teacher is guiding that creativity. Well, in the pillar of Portrait of the Graduate, we want to think about creative thinking and expand it to beyond the walls of the classroom, and understand that you can learn to put things together differently. And creativity is about how to solve a problem in a new way and flip it on its upside down and solve it in a new way and bring something new to the world. So what does space look like that supports that? Unleashing creativity is unlimited boundaries for thinking and learning, finding space that can really drive that creativity, opportunities for inspiration. And like Colin said, that's larger than life, thinking those thoughts that can expand our thinking. So we're going to do something a little different tonight. We're going to break into small groups 3 different times. Instead of saving the discussion for the end, we're going to engage with you all along the way. So this is the first question for tonight, and we're going to be given 10 minutes to discuss it in the small breakout rooms. Thinking beyond classrooms, what types of settings inspire you to think creatively? The co-chair, Manny?
Okay, this purpose of the community discussion is to review the final 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate: creativity, critical thinking, and technology. In this breakout session, we will be specifically looking at the pillar of creativity. Think about the presentation we have just heard and how we can support this pillar with space in our school facilities. How would these spaces work? What types of spaces would encourage our students to be imaginative and explore original ideas and innovative solutions by transcending traditional thoughts, patterns, and relationships? The specific question that you will be answering is, thinking beyond classrooms, what types of settings inspire you to think creativity? Think creatively, excuse me. With that, our Zoom moderator will organize us into breakout rooms for a more intimate conversation. When you receive this Zoom link, you were you were given a specific breakout room assignment. Please select that room when the options pop up. Each group will have a champion, reporter, and a scribe. After 10 minutes, we will come back together and report to the group at large. If you are selected as the scribe, please ensure you fill out the Google form and please submit your responses to each individual question after every breakout room. You will always go to the same breakout room tonight. And with that, you can now go to your breakout rooms.
So it may take a little while because Misty's sorting us into breakout rooms. So just please be patient and you'll receive an invitation eventually.
Okay. Trisha, is there any interesting thoughts that you've seen on any of the Google Forms that you may have been shared?
Do we want to hear from the two groups first? And then I think there's only one response on the Google form so far. I can report from group one, if that's where we can start. Let's see. Or I'll give Laura a chance. She was our scribe. So if Laura wants to report out, she can go ahead.
I actually, before people started talking, I was going to say nature. So that actually aligned well with a lot of our conversation. So I agree. I am inspired by nature.
So our group talked about, oops. Art studio spaces, nature, woods, just digging in the dirt, unstructured opportunities, play is a chance for creativity. Sharon mentioned using Connects or Lego to inspire inspiration, and just acknowledging that being out in nature kind of makes things more open-ended and helps us to think in different ways, but then we can also observe different patterns that we see in nature. And that there is research, board member Eric Brown mentioned that there's research about taking groups out into nature. And so if we were looking at an opportunity for a new building or something like that, looking for spaces that are co-located or nearby a ravine or some other opportunities so that transportation is not a barrier. And we have some opportunities for that at some of our schools. And so those are great opportunities for being creative in nature, and not just thinking about science, but that idea that they're being creative with writing poetry or doing their math. And it goes beyond just science study, but studying other fields too. That was group one.
Who wants to report out on group two?
Who was the scribe?
I was the scribe. I was hoping not to be the reporter out. But okay, so we talked about bringing outside light in, and ways to do that, either by windows or by using like a filter or a screen over the light to to offer a different view than the light. The person who mentioned it talked about at their dentist's office, there's like a nature scene over the overhead light. And so when you're sitting in the chair, you can look at that. We also talked about use of color. Somebody else mentioned multimedia, and both in classrooms and in hallways, and using that to convey messages or information and motivational support for students. I mentioned that like lab space, I'm an experiential learner, and so I really need to be doing it with my hands in order to internalize whatever it is. And so I forget what else there was. can somebody else chime in?
I mentioned going to actual spaces, for example, like the Wexner Center, and kids looking at the architectural structures there and then using that to be creative, and other alternative spaces for learning. I'm a dancer, and so dancers a lot of times will try to go to alternative spaces to do create work and perform. For example, could be a museum space, it could be a cafeteria, it could be multiple places.
Really great discussion. Thank you so much for that in-depth piece. I think Manny had asked, yeah, if there was any other comments in the chat. I don't see anything else. Trisha, do you have anything else?
Real quick, did Keisha have her hand raised? I thought I saw that.
She said she was
Oh,
clapping.
just I was clapping, saying good job. Thank you.
All right.
It looks like everything was pretty well covered. I just wanted to mention too, in our group, just that talk about how being out in nature, not just creativity as it connects with curricular things, but also the social emotional piece is really important too. And one of our participants mentioned having guided either meditation or yoga out in nature as well. And I know in our previous sessions that was something that families really and community members were really looking at, that we really need to make sure that we are having spaces that connect with or allow not just students, but also staff and teachers to be able to get away a little bit and work on social emotional health as well. So that was a great mention.
I also want to add to group 2, and this I just thought about how important it is, and we talked about the opportunity for young people to kind of like create, I don't know what to really call it, but the space that they learn in maybe, and certain people talked about how they need a little bit of noise, maybe music or something like that, and maybe headphones could be utilized. But we also wanted to give respect to those kids who are used to like the quiet, for them to pay attention, and trying to figure out ways to create that opportunity for those students that learn differently but still be in the same space. And some people talked about creating a room within a room where the teacher could still engage with all the students, and also brought up the opportunity for Bluetooth in terms of using headphones, so that some could create that little bit of music or sound that allows them to stay, involved versus, kind of their mind wandering and going elsewhere. So I wanted to bring that back up.
Great comments. So Colin's going to lead us through our next pillar.
Okay, the next pillar is critical thinking. Excuse me. Our students will analyze and apply evidence-based reasoning to understand big picture challenges and how solutions affect other parts of a system. And in doing so, it's important to understand that critical thinking often implies risk-taking in the form of challenging prior learning and tacit assumptions, while also considering opposing views and stretching capacities to learn new skills and information. And the physical spaces should provide the support and cognitive safety for student and educator risk-taking. Critical thinking can also require maximum cognitive effort, and the physical spaces should accommodate the varied ways to support student and educator conditions for critical thinking.
So if we imagine a critical thinking space, traditionally it's thought of in a lab space because critical thinking has to do with hands-on learning. It has to do with seeing things in a new way. And it's often collaborative, right? When we graduate, we're always working with a group and connecting with a group. So it's really important to encourage that for critical thinking. But when we think about space, let's expand it to not just be a lab space, but it can be anywhere where you can think about two dissimilar things and put them together in a new way. So it might be a place where there's spontaneous learning, where you run into someone that you've not met before, but they think in a different way. And you spend some time asking a question, and by working together, it's beyond 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 100 new ideas. So if you think about where that happens beyond the classroom, it can happen in an office space, right? That is collaborative. There's still room for individual learning, but there's space and comfortable seating for collaboration. It might just be a break room where we talked about social emotional sport. It might just be a place where you can go that's beyond the classroom, where you'll meet different folks. Someone that's really good at math, someone that's really good at art, and they'll put together, maybe think about architecture and solve a problem there. So that traditionally it might we think about critical thinking in lab space, but let's expand that thinking to be anywhere and beyond a classroom space. So our next question for discussion is, part of critical thinking is to challenge previous assumptions and connect unlike ideas. What are the characteristics of spaces needed to support critical thinking? Co-Chair Manning?
In this breakout session, we will now look at the pillar of critical thinking. Think about the presentation we have just heard and how we can support this pillar with space in our school facilities. How would these spaces work? What types of spaces would encourage our students to analyze and apply evidence-based reasoning to understand big picture challenges and how solutions affect other parts of a system? The specific question that you will be asking is, what are the characteristics of spaces needed to support critical thinking? With that, our Zoom moderator will organize us into the same breakout rooms for a more intimate conversation. You will be automatically placed into the breakout room you were previously in. After 10 minutes, we will come back together and report to the group at large. Please use the same scribe that was selected earlier. If you are the scribe, please ensure you fill out the Google form and please submit responses. With that, you can now go to your breakout rooms. Okay, everybody's back. Want to give a couple minutes for everybody to report out like last time. Anybody from group 1 or group 2 can go.
I'll go since group 1 went the first time. We can start off with group 2. So in our group, I started talking about open spaces that allow for students to be able to work in groups. I mentioned that in my space, when students come, because I'm Arts Impact, the students have to explore principles of dance, but also they make connections with what they're learning in their classroom. And so students then work in groups together in the open space and collaborate, exchange ideas in which all voices should be heard. And then the students reach a consensus and create a dance based on the dance concepts and what they're learning in their classroom. I'm sorry. Oh, someone also mentioned interactive boards, learning boards that also might connect with SEL. Those boards and that work could take place outside the classroom in, say, a hallway, other spaces that might be in the building. Someone mentioned a, I don't know if she used the word lounge, but a space in which there needs to be very clear expectations about what that space is, what it's used for, so that students are not taking advantage of it. Someone also mentioned that whenever you have critical thinking, sometimes there are debates where students can share their ideas. What kind of space would that be? And it was mentioned that it would have to be a space that is flexible, in which furniture could be easily moved or shifted so that students could work in groups and have that interactive time to share ideas, debate, collaborate. If I missed something, somebody else can add.
Group 1, would you like to report out?
I was trying to give somebody another chance. Laura, did you want to share or should I go ahead?
Yeah, I can share. I'm kind of my response out. I wrote, from what we talked about, space that promotes problem solving and focus. Everything has a purpose and distractions are minimal. Storage space so that what isn't needed at the time is out of the way, but still available. Having models or miniatures to experiment and act out ideas. Puzzles, interactive virtual activities via computers or on a classroom whiteboard. Access to correct information and the ability to discern the difference between reliable and false information. Space for movement to puzzle things out or think with hands and body, like doodling, jotting down ideas, pacing back and forth. And then we also talked about in the chat, like movable furniture, amphitheaters, physical structures like that.
Okay. Tricia, did you have anything that was in the chat she wanted to report?
I think everything was covered really well. It was a fun discussion, and I think it's nice to hear some of these more creative ways. We don't always get the opportunity to share about the creative side of things when there's a lot of, test focus and so on. But I think, well, and especially with this kind of pandemic year, there weren't performances. So you didn't see that creative side of things. And if you have been in a building, they don't look creative. They're not very inspiring when desks are, 6 feet apart and so on. So I don't from what we understand, the tables and the rugs for collaboration are coming back for next year, and we're excited for that. So,
One other thing that we talked about in group 2 that just popped up in my head was we're talking about spaces. And one person had talked about how cameras are in all the schools and they have like motivational posters. One was the word think that was actually turned into an acronym. But if we could think about how to actually make the spaces so that due to the media, the posters, and with the kids knowing that there's cameras around, so that the space didn't have to be as formally monitored as what the current model is now. Because if you don't have a teacher, like we talked about, teachers who they create the environment and say what has to happen in the classroom. Like we kind of tried to figure out how do you do that with a space.
Am I allowed to add anything to that? I'm so thanks. I was just going to say, because one of the things that I heard you say is, how we as teachers create those spaces, but we could assign areas or the students can create it the way that they want to create it, where it's, by grade levels, by subjects, by, whatever group we put the students in, then allow them to create that space, what they want it to look like. I know that's something that at our church, we allowed our youth to do, upstairs, and it became that space where they did, open up, share, all kinds of things happen up there, and it's amazing. So allowing the students to take part in that design would be amazing.
there's more freedom to explore and create and problem solve when they have that flexibility. That's a great point.
Wonderful discussion. Colin, you want to take us to the third and final pillar?
Sure. The last pillar we'll discuss tonight is technology. And it's defined as our students will leverage traditional and emerging technology to consume, create, communicate, and connect while practicing responsible citizenship in an increasingly digital world. And the implications on facilities that we have to keep in mind that we know technology is ever evolving, and it's evolving at even more rapid intervals than it has historically, and that physical spaces should have some measure of flexibility to accommodate the ongoing evolution of technology.
When we think about a space that's designed around technology, it's not the 1920s classroom where we're still in rows, we're still facing the front, the teacher's the front of the room, but all we've done is add technology. So we've got the big screen in front, which is great. We can see and connect. And then we're a one-to-one school, so everyone's got their own technology, but this is not designed for technology and really making the most of it. So we know that the kids are natives. They've been using technology all their lives. And so even infants, I've seen infants in the grocery store touching their parents' screen and being able to entertain themselves with technology. What we need are guides that can help us use it responsibly and know what the content is and screen the good content from the bad, right? There's all kinds of information out there. So we want to make sure that the guides, the teachers are helping us use the technology in a productive, positive way. And this is Google now. So as we prepare for the future of technology, the future is now. And how can these sort of spaces come into our educational environment? These are flexible, technologically driven. They're able to expand. There's space to add future technology. We don't want to to rigidly attach technology to the existing spaces. And we want to create a place that's flexible and adaptable to the future. And what could be, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, but we can provide that background so that there's opportunity for new and exciting trends in technology. So we've got one final question to break into the breakout session. Given the fast pace of technological change, how can we plan spaces to accommodate this fast-paced change? Annie?
In this breakout session, we will now look at the pillar of technology. Think about the presentation we have just heard and how we can support this pillar with space in our school facilities. How would these spaces work? What types of spaces would encourage our students to leverage traditional and emerging technology to consume, create, communicate, and connect while participating and practicing responsible citizenship in an increasingly digital world? The specific question that you would be answering is, given the fast pace of technological change, how can you plan spaces to accommodate this fast-paced change? With that, our Zoom moderator will organize us into the same breakout rooms for a more intimate conversation. Once more, you will be automatically placed in your breakout room. After 10 minutes, you will come back together and report to the large group. And please use the same scribe that was selected earlier. If you are the scribe, please ensure you fill out the Google form and submit your responses. With that, you can now go to your breakout room. All right, is everybody back? All right. Once again, let's report out, please. Group 1 and Group 2. Anyone, please.
I guess I'll go again because I'm probably going to forget something that we said. So anybody can chime in on my group. We talked about what technology means a lot. And then where is he? Dennis said something called, it's for us to create, for students to create, not only consume. And I mentioned OSU, connecting with OSU and their engineering students. I mentioned the ACAD Center at Ohio State and how they use technology. My students went there and they put on sensors and saw how the sensors could make a character move as they move their body. And so they learned a lot about technology, and they are really on the cutting edge of what's happening. So that is another way for students to really see what's happening. As far as spaces, we talked about spaces that are accommodating to hands-on, that we would probably need some space that allows space for students to actually create with whatever they're using to create with. Storage, we talked about power, but we also talked about accommodations for new technology. We talked about how technology changes so quickly, and in order to keep up with the changes, we need to be on the cutting edge of having upgraded infrastructure for fiber and anything that's coming our way for growth. We need to have funding for that, not just power, but what is changing in our world. Our teachers need to have professional development to understand some of those new changes. And the thought was that we probably need to have staff that are people who are updated daily about what is happening and what's changing in our world, so that teachers can learn how to use technology, but not just about technology or how to use it, but how students can use it to learn, to use it to learn and create, use critical thinking skills.
In group 1, we shared about, again, open spaces, flexible work spaces, but not only creating them that way with movable walls, but making sure that the flexibility will continue, that there aren't maintenance concerns or other issues that, you know, force it just to kind of be stuck in a regular space for years and years, but that it's really able to be used truly as flexible spaces. So yeah, getting away from just having the 4 walls, looking at technology outside of the building, allocating funds for building, for that flexible use into the maintenance, looking at the life cycle and versus the first cost. So if it's, you know, wiring all rooms to have, you know, increased technology usage, even if they're not being used for that at the time, so that they're kind of ready to go. So board member Eric Brown mentioned, you know, some kind of like wiring in or building false floors so that there's access to cabling and the possibility of moving outlets. And I think it was Laura who has experience in the library field and just having outlets in furniture and just multiple outlets available to having green screens available, maker spaces, making sure that either the building or just students at home have access to different licenses, maybe student licenses for design, and kind of testing out some of those ideas, whether it's through AutoCAD or the like Revit drawings, modeling software, or other types of software that that more applies to what they're using. And then we even talked about changes in technology when it comes to even career technical fields. So that's a big area where we may have changes in technology happening, and it could revolutionize like a trade that our students need to know in their program. So looking at agricultural technology changes, and even just looking at that again in the outdoor space as well. So anybody else want to chime in anything that was missed in group 1 or 2?
Anything on the Google Docs or Google Forms that you thought was interesting, Tricia?
I think just that, I think a good way to sum it up is the collaboration, that it's hands-on, it's truly experiential. So building the spaces for that ability, again, the flexible space, so that it sometimes is working in much smaller groups, but then presenting out to larger groups. That's part of where that flexible space is really important.
Okay. I guess so. Before we turn it back over to Colin for last thoughts, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments? All right. I will now turn it back over to Colin.
Thank you. Just to share some final thoughts as it relates to the research and facilities and the portrait. Creating innovative learning spaces is important, but providing support to the teachers for how to maximally use the space is equally as important. And so there's an outstanding resource out of Australia that is researching the concept of innovative spaces and pedagogy that might be very helpful for this work, and the link is listed below. And this research collaboration has been about the earliest efforts to study the impact of facility design on student learning. And they found that the impact of facility design on student learning is heavily influenced by the skill of the teachers to maximize the space. And so there are also other research initiatives out there around small class size and student outcomes, whether it's the Tennessee Project, STAR, Texas $1 billion class size initiative, so on and so forth. So there is a link to some research that talks about how these spaces, if maximized and used appropriately by the staff, can certainly have impacts on student achievement.
Okay. So with that, thank you everyone for presenting your thoughts and ideas. All of this will be incorporated into the report of how this master plan will come together. The comments from tonight, along with the comments from the community discussions from the other 5 planning regions, will be reviewed at a facility planning committee meeting. This review process will lead to the future questions in upcoming surveys. Please join us on Wednesday, June 30th at 6 p.m. by tuning in virtually at this meeting. Will be live streamed on the district Facebook and YouTube page. Just as a reminder, if you would like to catch up on any of the previous phases or the upcoming phase, please visit our FMP website at ccsoh.us/FMP. Thank you so much for taking time to share today. Look for a new survey for the defined phase in the upcoming weeks. We all look forward to our next community discussion to report all the data that has been gathered over the first 3 phases. We feel it is necessary to keep you as informed as possible before we start to create concepts of the master plan later in fall 2022. Your input is greatly appreciated. Enjoy your summer and see you in September.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you.